Good afternoon or good morning. Today we're going to be working in content collaboration teams. Your department chairs have worked with TEKS administrators to determine what content collaboration team you're going to be working on. And today we're starting the first step, which is identifying essential standards. As you know, working in content collaboration teams help us to do the work of goal number 1 from the school improvement plan. Goal number 1 is to improve student outcomes by strengthening and adjusting instructional practices and implementing interventions based upon analysis of student assessment data. So the very first thing that we have to determine is what is it we want students to know, and that way we can adjust our instructional practices and implement interventions based upon the analysis of data that we collect. So that's what we're going to be working on today, again, identifying those essential standards. From pre-planning, we learned that our county focus is on intentional strategic planning with the instructional framework. So all of that falls into, our work today will fall into the instructional framework.
The first part of the instructional framework is the planning phase, and our work with content collaboration teams will charge us to review our standards and learning targets, establish success criteria for student learning, and design assessments that measure student learning. The third phase of the instructional framework is monitoring. Within our content collaboration teams, we will also focus energy on how we monitor student learning. In this phase, we will use common formative assessments to adjust instruction, provide remediation, and give students targeted feedback about their learning. So as we begin this work, our first step is to agree on essential priority standards. Teams will need to plan when a student should be expected to be proficient with a standard or a specific skill. Teams will need to revisit standards and learning targets to build a common understanding of what students must know and be able to do.
Our work today will not be focusing on all 4 of the questions or the learning targets on the previous slide, but today we want to focus on determining essential standards. And if there is time, teams will begin discussing the progression of skills within the standards and when students should be proficient with each standard or skill. So how do we choose essential standards? Of course, we're responsible for teaching all standards for our content, but essential standards represent the minimum knowledge or skills a student must have by the end of the course. These are the standards we must remediate and students recover in order to complete the course. So we're asking you today to work with your team to determine those standards, that you're making a commitment that these are the standards by the end of the year that students must know. These are not the standards that are nice to know. What really is the difference then between all standards and these essential standards? It really lies in bullet 2, that these are the standards or skills that must be remediated and recovered in order to move forward with the learning. How do we choose essential standards? If we teach all standards, how do we decide what qualifies as got to know? First, teams should narrow down the standards to 8 to 12 at the most. And then teams should use the REAL, R-E-A-L acronym to evaluate standards. REAL stands for readiness, endurance, assessed, and leveraged.
When the team is deciding if it is a REAL standard, you should consider the following. R stands for readiness. Standards that provide readiness give students the skills and knowledge needed in the next course or grade level. So consider whether or not the skill that the standard represents will be used in the next grade level or in the next sequence of course for your content area. Standards with endurance have knowledge and skills that continue well beyond a single unit and are used throughout a course. So consider if this skill is represented or utilized in each of the units that you teach. If so, that standard has endurance. Standards that are assessed are likely to show up on state and national exams like EOCs, PSAT, SAT, ACT, and end-of-pathway assessments. Finally, standards that can be leveraged give students knowledge and skills that they regularly apply to other disciplines and maybe their lives after high school. So when evaluating standards for whether they are leveraged or not, ask yourself if students use this same skill in a different content area, or if it directly applies to the job force and how students will use this skill in their careers after high school.
Many of you may be thinking, I've already broken down standards. I've already helped choose priority standards. So you're asking yourself, why are we doing this again? It has been some years since some departments have unpacked standards, but it is a smart idea to revisit that work and prioritize standards so that we have a greater consistency. If you look at the bullets on this particular slide, what are some reasons that we prioritize standards? To gain greater consistency regarding the importance of different standards, to gain greater clarity regarding the interpretation, to create standards-based common formative assessments and interventions that address student learning. We know that most departments have common summative assessments in place as directed by our county. Currently, in this new content collaboration team, we're asking you to also develop standard common formative assessments. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what standards should be on those common formatives. We're not asking that all formative assessments be common. We're saying maybe 2 in your unit of study. You would then you would get together, you're going to work on that data that you have, and you're going to do interventions based on that data from the common formative assessments. And lastly, why are we doing this? To accurately understand student progress towards standards mastery. What we're really saying is that with all of us choosing what standards to emphasize, what standards to remediate, what standards students must know to be successful in the class, with greater clarity and greater purpose, we feel that there will be consistency, and it won't matter what 10th grade English teacher your student has. All students will be receiving a consistent educational experience. Again, the 4 critical questions of collaborative teams, I'm sure you recognize those by now, but those are driving our work. And those questions again are, what do we want students to know and be able to do? How will we know when a student has learned a new content or skill? How will we respond when students haven't learned the content or skill? And how will we respond when students have learned the content or skill? The focus of our work today, choosing essential standards, is the focused work of question 1. What do we want students to know and be able to do?
Now we will break into our teams and identify the standards. Make sure that you designate someone in your group to take notes. You'll be able to work at most 40 minutes in order to identify these essential standards. We are here to help you and help guide your work, answer questions if you need to. There's also a handout that we will make available to you to help guide your conversations about whether standards meet that real acronym.
And some of you may be wondering, why is it that we're only providing such a limited time, such as 40 minutes? Part of that has to do with the fact that we can debate this for hours and hours and hours. But what we need to do is to go ahead and make a decision about what are these standards that we need to focus on.
So go ahead, get started, and please let us know if you need any help or guidance.